The words cut through me like broken glass. You people don't belong in places like this. She stood there in her designer suit and diamond earrings, looking at me like I was dirt on her expensive shoes, not knowing that in 12 hours our roles would be completely reversed. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Maya Johnson, and I'm a 34-year-old African-American woman living in Chicago. For the past 3 years, I've been working as a night janitor at Meridian Financial, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. But that's not the whole story. It's barely even the beginning. You see, I have a secret that nobody at that gleaming downtown office tower knows about. By day, I'm Dr. Maya Johnson, a financial forensics consultant with a PhD in economics from Northwestern University. I specialize in uncovering corporate fraud and money laundering schemes for federal agencies. The janitorial job? It's my cover for the biggest investigation of my career. 3 months ago, the FBI approached me about suspicious activities at Meridian Financial. Millions of dollars were disappearing, and they needed someone on the inside who could access the offices after hours without raising suspicion. Someone who would be invisible to the very people we were investigating. Someone like a janitor that the wealthy executives would look right through. I thought I was prepared for the assignment. I'd faced racism before, in graduate school, in corporate boardrooms, in everyday life as a black woman in America. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that Tuesday night in October, when Patricia Whitmore, Meridian's senior vice president, decided to work late and encountered me in the hallway. My life up until that point had been a series of proving myself over and over again. Growing up in South Chicago, I was raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Grandma Rose worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, but she always emphasized education. "Knowledge is the one thing they can't take away from you, baby girl," she'd say, while helping me with homework at our tiny kitchen table. I was valedictorian of my high school class, earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, and graduated summa cum laude. I got my master's in finance, then my PhD in economics, specializing in financial crimes. I'd been successful, respected, and financially secure. I owned a beautiful condo in Lincoln Park, drove a luxury car, and had built a reputation as one of the most skilled forensic accountants in the Midwest. But all of that meant nothing when I put on that blue uniform and picked up a mop. It was 11:47 p.m. when I encountered Patricia Whitmore in the 40th floor executive corridor. I was methodically cleaning offices, photographing documents, and copying computer files as part of my investigation. The FBI had provided me with sophisticated equipment disguised as cleaning supplies, a camera hidden in my spray bottle, a USB drive concealed in my vacuum cleaner. I had just finished documenting some suspicious transactions in the chief financial officer's office when I heard the sharp click of heels in the hallway. Patricia emerged from the corner office, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, her Chanel suit immaculate. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question your place in the world. She stopped abruptly when she saw me, her blue eyes scanning me from head to toe with obvious distaste. I continued cleaning, hoping she'd simply walk past, but she planted herself directly in my path. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What are you doing up here?" "Cleaning, ma'am," I replied respectfully, keeping my head down and continuing to work. "This is the executive floor. The cleaning service isn't supposed to be up here this late." Her tone was accusatory, as if I was committing some crime by doing my job. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I was told to clean all floors before morning." I can come back later if you prefer. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. Look at me when I'm talking to you. I raised my eyes to meet hers, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It wasn't just annoyance or inconvenience. It was pure contempt. She was looking at me like I was less than human. "What's your name?" she demanded. "Maya," I said simply. "Maya what?" "Maya Johnson." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm going to check with the cleaning company. Something doesn't seem right about this. You people are always trying to get into places where you don't belong." The words hit me like a physical blow. You people. Two simple words that carried centuries of racism, prejudice, and hatred. In that moment, I wasn't Dr. Maya Johnson, PhD. I wasn't a federal consultant trusted with national security matters. I was just another black woman being told she didn't belong. "Ma'am, I can show you my work badge," I started to say. "Don't you dare reach for anything," she snapped, backing away as if I might attack her. "I don't know what you're really doing up here, but I'm calling security." My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was exactly what I'd been trained for, to maintain my cover no matter what happened. But the personal cost was devastating. Every fiber of my being wanted to tell her exactly who I was, to show her my credentials, to demand the respect I'd earned through years of hard work and achievement. Instead, I watched as she dialed security, describing me as a suspicious person who was probably up to no good. She used phrases like, "You know how they are," and "We can't be too careful these days." Each word was a knife in my heart. "Yes, I need security on the 40th floor immediately," she said into her phone. "There's a cleaning woman up here who seems questionable. She's probably stealing something." Stealing something. The irony was almost too much to bear. I was there to investigate the theft of millions of dollars, and she was accusing me of petty theft simply because of the color of my skin. Two security guards arrived within minutes, both white men who looked at me with the same suspicion Patricia had shown. They demanded to search my cleaning cart, going through my supplies while treating me like a criminal. The hidden FBI equipment was expertly concealed, but the humiliation was complete. "Check her pockets," Patricia instructed. "These people always take things." These people. There it was again. As if I wasn't standing right there. As if I was some sort of specimen to be examined rather than a human being deserving of basic dignity. The security guards patted me down while Patricia watched with satisfaction. They found nothing, of course, but that didn't stop her from continuing her verbal assault. "I don't care what the cleaning company says," she declared. "I want her off this floor. People like her shouldn't be up here anyway. This is where important business happens, not somewhere for—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Not somewhere for people like her to be wandering around." One of the security guards, who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, she does have proper credentials," the cleaning company confirmed. "I don't care," Patricia interrupted. "I want her moved to the lower floors. The basement, the parking garage, somewhere more appropriate for someone of her background." Someone of my background. A PhD in economics, years of experience in financial investigations, federal security clearance. But all she saw was a black woman with a mop, and that was enough to determine my worth in her eyes. As they escorted me away from the executive floor, Patricia called out one final insult. "And make sure she knows that if anything goes missing from up here, we'll know exactly who to blame. You people always think you can take what doesn't belong to you." I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. Not ever in front of her. The incident with Patricia Whitmore changed everything about my assignment. Not only did I have to continue my investigation while dealing with the emotional trauma of that encounter, but I also had to navigate the new restrictions she'd placed on my movements. Security was now watching me constantly, following me from floor to floor, making my real work nearly impossible. But more than the professional obstacles, I was struggling with something deeper. The encounter had reopened wounds I thought had healed years ago. It brought back memories of every time I'd been followed in a store, every time someone had assumed I didn't belong in a nice restaurant, every time my qualifications had been questioned simply because of my race. The memories came flooding back in vivid detail. I remembered being 12 years old, walking through the upscale department store downtown with my grandmother. We were shopping for my graduation dress. I had earned a scholarship to a prestigious private school, and Grandma Rose was determined to buy me something special. But instead of celebrating, we spent the afternoon being followed by store security, watched like criminals as we browsed the racks. "Can I help you find something in your price range?" a saleswoman had asked with a condescending smile, her eyes scanning our modest clothes and making assumptions about our ability to afford anything in the store. My grandmother had straightened her shoulders, looked the woman directly in the eye, and said with quiet dignity, "We're looking for a graduation dress for my granddaughter. She's valedictorian of her class and has earned a full scholarship to attend St. Catherine's Academy. We'll take our time and choose whatever we feel is appropriate." The saleswoman's face had flushed red with embarrassment, but the damage was done. Even at 12, I understood that we were being judged not by our character or achievements, but by the color of our skin and the assumptions people made about what we deserved. Now, 22 years later, I was experiencing the same prejudice in a different setting. The uniform I wore, the job I was pretending to do, somehow gave people like Patricia permission to treat me as less than human. It didn't matter that I had more education than most of the executives in that building. It didn't matter that I was trusted by federal agencies to handle sensitive investigations. All that mattered to them was what they saw on the surface. The psychological toll was exhausting. Every night when I came home to my beautiful condo, I would sit in my living room surrounded by my diplomas, my awards, my evidence of success, and wonder if any of it really mattered. If people could look at me and see only a stereotype, what was the point of all my achievements? I found myself questioning things I had never questioned before. Was I really as successful as I thought I was? Had people in my professional life been treating me with respect because of my qualifications? Or were they just better at hiding their prejudices? How many times had I walked into a room and been underestimated before I even opened my mouth? The worst part was the way it affected my work on the investigation. I had to force myself to return to that building every night, knowing that Patricia might be there. Knowing that the security guards were watching me with suspicion, knowing that every employee who had heard about the incident was looking at me like a potential threat. My usual confidence was shaken. I had always prided myself on being able to handle any situation, to maintain my professionalism no matter what challenges I faced. But this was different. This wasn't about professional competence or intellectual ability. This was about being seen as fundamentally lesser because of something I had no control over, the color of my skin. I started second-guessing every interaction. When a white employee nodded politely as I passed them in the hallway, were they being respectful, or were they just trying to avoid eye contact? When someone held an elevator door for me, were they being courteous, or were they afraid of what I might do if they let it close? Every gesture, every word, every look became loaded with potential meaning. The investigation itself was revealing more disturbing patterns than I had initially expected. As I continued to gather evidence, I discovered that Patricia's racist attitudes were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader culture of discrimination at Meridian Financial. Email chains I photographed revealed casual racism throughout the executive ranks. Jokes about diversity hires, complaints about having to interview unqualified minority candidates, and discussions about how to maintain the company culture without explicitly violating anti-discrimination laws. One email exchange particularly stood out. It was between Patricia and the chief executive officer, discussing a recent hire in the accounting department. "I'm concerned about the new girl in accounting," Patricia had written. "She seems competent enough, but I worry about cultural fit. You know how these people can be. One day they're fine, the next day they're filing lawsuits about discrimination. Maybe we should find a reason to let her go during the probationary period." The CEO's response was even more chilling. "I agree. We've worked too hard to build our reputation to let it be damaged by troublemakers. See what you can do about documenting some performance issues. Make it look legitimate." They were discussing destroying a black woman's career simply because they were afraid she might stand up for herself if mistreated. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't just about my personal experience. It was about a systematic effort to exclude and eliminate people who looked like me from positions of power and influence. As I dug deeper into the financial crimes, I began to see how the company's racist culture connected to their criminal activities. The same people who felt entitled to discriminate against employees based on race also felt entitled to steal from pension funds and charitable organizations. Their sense of superiority, their belief that rules didn't apply to them, their assumption that they could get away with anything, it was all part of the same mindset. Patricia's criminal activities were particularly brazen. She had been skimming money from accounts belonging to predominantly black churches and Hispanic community organizations, apparently believing that these groups wouldn't have the resources or sophistication to detect the theft. She had literally been stealing from the communities she looked down upon, adding financial crime to her personal racism. The irony was overwhelming. She saw me as a potential thief because of my race, while she was actually stealing millions of dollars from people who shared my background. She treated me like a criminal while she was the one committing federal crimes. The projection was so complete that it would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. But I was also discovering something else in my investigation, evidence of my own strength and resilience that I hadn't fully recognized before. Despite the psychological pressure, despite the humiliation, despite the constant vigilance required to maintain my cover, I was doing excellent work. My documentation was thorough, my analysis was sharp, and my ability to gather evidence while under intense scrutiny was proving exactly why the FBI had chosen me for this assignment. Every night when I reviewed the day's findings, I was reminded of something my grandmother used to tell me. "Baby girl, they can try to break your spirit, but they can't break your brain. Use that mind of yours and show them what you're really made of." I was doing exactly that. Every photograph I took, every document I copied, every financial record I analyzed was a small act of resistance against the people who thought I didn't belong. I was using my intelligence, my education, and my skills to expose the very people who had tried to diminish me. The psychological transformation was gradual but profound. The anger I felt at being mistreated was crystallizing into determination. The hurt was becoming fuel for justice. The humiliation was strengthening my resolve to prove not just my own worth, but the worth of everyone who had ever been underestimated because of their race, their background, or their circumstances. I started thinking about this case differently. It wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about confronting a system of prejudice that allowed people like Patricia to feel justified in their discrimination. It was about proving that their assumptions were not just morally wrong, but dangerously misguided. They had mistaken me for someone powerless, someone they could dismiss and degrade without consequences. They had no idea that their treatment of me was being documented, not just in my memory, but in official federal reports that would eventually be presented in a court of law. They had no idea that their racist assumptions were blinding them to the very real threat I posed to their criminal enterprise. Patricia thought she was putting me in my place by having me searched and humiliated. In reality, she was providing me with evidence of her character that would ultimately be used against her in court. She thought she was protecting her criminal operation by restricting my access to the executive floors. In reality, she was creating a pattern of suspicious behavior that only strengthened the case against her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that racism wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was strategically stupid. By judging people based on stereotypes rather than reality, Patricia and her co-conspirators had made themselves vulnerable to exactly the kind of investigation that was now destroying their lives. They had been so busy looking down on me that they never looked closely enough to see who I really was, and that oversight was going to cost them everything. I started having nightmares. In them, I was back in that hallway, but this time I couldn't maintain my cover. I was screaming at Patricia, telling her about my education, my achievements, my real identity. But she just kept laughing, saying, "I don't care what papers you have. You're still just a n." I would wake up in a cold sweat, my grandmother's voice echoing in my mind. "Don't let them steal your dignity, baby girl. That's all you really have in this world." But the nightmares weren't the worst part. The worst part was how the incident had infected my daily life outside of the investigation. I found myself hyper-aware of every interaction with white people, searching their faces for signs of the same contempt I had seen in Patricia's eyes. When I went to my regular coffee shop near my condo, I wondered if the barista's smile was genuine or if she was just being professionally polite to someone she secretly judged. When I attended professional meetings in my real job, I found myself overanalyzing every comment, every facial expression, looking for hidden meanings. The trauma was making me question memories I had previously accepted at face value. That time in graduate school when a professor had seemed surprised by my insightful analysis. Had he been pleasantly surprised by intellectual excellence, or surprised that someone who looked like me could think at that level? The colleague who always seemed to need to verify my work more thoroughly than others. Was he just being careful? Or did he fundamentally doubt my competence? I called my therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, whom I had seen periodically over the years to help process the stress of my high-pressure career. But this time felt different. This time I wasn't dealing with work stress or professional challenges. I was dealing with something much more fundamental, an assault on my basic human dignity. "Maya," Dr. Chen said during our emergency session, "what you're experiencing is a form of racial trauma. When someone treats you as less than human because of your race, it doesn't just hurt in the moment. It can trigger a cascade of psychological responses that affect how you see yourself and the world around you." "But I'm supposed to be stronger than this," I said, frustrated with my own emotional responses. "I have a PhD, I'm successful. I'm working with the FBI, for God's sake. I shouldn't let one ignorant woman get to me like this. Your education and success don't make you immune to racism. Dr. Chen replied gently. In fact, sometimes it can make it worse, because there's an added layer of cognitive dissonance. You know your worth intellectually, but racism attacks you on a deeper, more primitive level. It's designed to make you doubt everything you know about yourself. She was right. That was exactly what was happening. Patricia's treatment of me hadn't just been insulting, it had been specifically calculated to undermine my sense of self-worth. Every "you people" comment, every assumption about my character, every restriction on my movement had been designed to remind me that in her world, my achievements meant nothing compared to my skin color. But as the days passed and I continued my investigation, I began to see something else emerging from the trauma. A crystalline clarity about my purpose. The anger I felt wasn't just personal anymore. It was righteous indignation on behalf of everyone who had ever been treated the way Patricia had treated me. The determination I felt wasn't just about solving this case. It was about striking a blow against the entire system of assumptions and prejudices that made people like Patricia feel entitled to their racism. I thought about my grandmother more during those difficult weeks than I had in years. Grandma Rose had faced far worse than anything I was experiencing, living through the Jim Crow era in the South before moving north to Chicago in search of better opportunities. She had endured segregation, employment discrimination, and daily humiliations that made my experience at Meridian Financial seem almost mild by comparison. But she had never let it break her spirit. She had worked 3 jobs, saved every penny, and made sure I had opportunities she never could have dreamed of. She had faced down racist store clerks, condescending teachers, and employers who tried to pay her less than white workers, and she had done it all with a dignity and grace that I was only beginning to understand. They can try to make you feel small, she used to tell me, but you don't have to stay small. You can take all that hurt they're trying to give you and turn it into something powerful. You can use it to fuel the fire that makes you great. Now I understood what she meant. The pain Patricia had inflicted wasn't just an obstacle to overcome. It was raw material that could be transformed into something meaningful. Every moment of humiliation was becoming motivation to expose not just her crimes, but the mindset that enabled them. Every racist assumption she had made about me was becoming evidence of the toxic culture that pervaded Meridian Financial. During the day, I continued my regular work as a forensic consultant, attending meetings with federal agents, analyzing financial data, building the case against Meridian Financial. But every night, I had to return to that building, put on that uniform, and face the possibility of encountering Patricia again. She seemed to be working late more often now, as if she was intentionally trying to catch me in some wrongdoing. Sometimes I would see her watching me from her office window as I worked on the lower floors. Her presence was like a constant weight on my shoulders, a reminder that no matter what I achieved in my real life, there would always be people who saw only my skin color. The other employees at Meridian had started treating me differently too. Word had spread about the incident on the executive floor, and now everyone looked at me with suspicion. Some of the white employees would suddenly stop talking when I entered a room, clutching their purses or briefcases closer. Others would make comments just loud enough for me to hear about keeping an eye on the help, and you never know who they're hiring these days. One particularly painful evening, I overheard 2 junior executives discussing me in the break room. "I heard she was snooping around upstairs," one said. "Patricia thinks she was probably looking for things to steal." "Well, you know how it is," the other replied. "They see all this wealth and think they deserve a piece of it. It's in their nature." Their nature. As if being black meant I was genetically predisposed to criminality. as if the centuries of systemic racism, economic oppression, and institutional barriers that my community had faced meant nothing. As if every degree I'd earned, every achievement I'd accomplished, every ethical choice I'd made in my life was somehow negated by the color of my skin. I thought about quitting the assignment. The FBI had other options, other ways to gather the evidence they needed. But every time I considered walking away, I remembered my grandmother's words. You can't let them win, baby girl. You've got to be twice as good to get half as much. But that don't mean you give up. More importantly, I began to realize that this assignment was about more than just catching financial criminals. It was about exposing the deeper corruption that existed in places like Meridian Financial. The assumption that people like me were inherently less trustworthy, less intelligent, less deserving of respect than people like Patricia Whitmore. The investigation itself was revealing patterns of fraud that went far beyond what the FBI had initially suspected. Patricia wasn't just a racist executive. She was one of the masterminds behind a sophisticated money laundering operation that had stolen over $50 million from pension funds and charitable organizations. Money that belonged to teachers, firefighters, and community groups. Money that could have helped people in neighborhoods like the one where I grew up. As I gathered more evidence, I started to see the bigger picture. The same entitled attitude that made Patricia feel comfortable treating me like a criminal was the same attitude that made her feel comfortable stealing from people she considered beneath her. The racism and the financial crimes were connected. Both stemmed from a fundamental belief that some people mattered more than others. But I was also discovering something else. Patricia had made a crucial mistake in her criminal activities, one that would be nearly impossible to cover up once it was exposed. She had been sloppy, overconfident, secure in the belief that no one would ever question someone in her position. She had created a paper trail that led directly back to her personal accounts, evidence that would be damning in a federal court. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same arrogance that made her treat me with such contempt was the same arrogance that would ultimately bring her down. 3 weeks after the humiliating encounter in the hallway, everything changed in a single moment that I will never forget. It was a Thursday morning, and I was in my office at the FBI field building, preparing the final evidence packages for the Meridian Financial case. My supervisor, Agent Sarah Martinez, knocked on my door with an urgent expression. "Maya, we need to move on Meridian today," she said. "Our sources indicate they're planning to transfer the remaining funds offshore tomorrow. If we don't act now, we'll lose our chance to recover the money." I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with nervous anticipation. After months of careful investigation, we were finally ready to spring the trap. The evidence I'd gathered was overwhelming. Detailed financial records, email communications, recorded phone conversations, and photographic evidence of document destruction. Patricia Whitmore and her co-conspirators had no idea what was coming. "What's the plan?" I asked. "Federal agents will execute search warrants at the offices and the suspects' homes simultaneously at 10 a.m. We want you there when we arrest Patricia. After what she put you through, you've earned the right to see this through to the end." At 9:55 a.m., I was standing in the lobby of Meridian Financial, wearing my best business suit and carrying my federal credentials. Around me, FBI agents were taking positions throughout the building. In 5 minutes, Patricia Whitmore's world was going to collapse. I rode the elevator to the 40th floor, the same executive floor where I'd been humiliated and degraded just weeks before. But this time, I wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. This time, I was Dr. Maya Johnson, federal consultant, and I was there to serve justice. Patricia was in her office, talking on the phone when the agents knocked on her door. Through the glass walls, I could see her confident expression falter as Agent Martinez showed her the search warrant. Her face went completely pale when she saw me standing behind the federal agents. I watched as the reality of the situation slowly dawned on her. Her eyes moved from Agent Martinez's badge to the search warrant in her hands, then to my face. For a moment, she looked confused, as if she was trying to process why the janitor was standing with federal agents in business attire. Then recognition hit her like a physical blow. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be. You're just a cleaning woman." Agent Martinez stepped forward with professional authority. "Patricia Whitmore, you're under arrest for money laundering, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane," Patricia screamed, her composure completely shattered. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She's nobody. She's just a janitor. How can she possibly—" "Ma'am," Agent Martinez interrupted firmly, "I need you to stop talking and listen to your rights." But Patricia was beyond listening. Her world was collapsing, and she was grasping for any explanation that would make sense to her prejudiced mind. "This is some kind of mistake," she insisted, her voice rising to near hysteria. "She can't be with the FBI. Look at her. People like her don't have the education for that kind of work." The look on Patricia's face was something I'll treasure forever. Complete and utter shock, followed by the dawning realization that the janitor she'd treated like dirt was actually the person who had brought her criminal empire crashing down. I stepped forward, my voice calm and professional. "Patricia, I'm Dr. Maya Johnson, financial forensics consultant with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a PhD in economics from Northwestern University and 15 years of experience in financial crimes investigation. For the past 3 months, I've been documenting your criminal activities while working undercover at this firm." Her mouth fell open. "You," she gasped, staring at me in disbelief. You're... I'm the person who's been building a comprehensive case against you for the past 3 months," I continued, pulling out my credentials. "I've documented every aspect of your criminal operation, the money laundering, the embezzlement from pension funds, the theft from charitable organizations. Thanks to my work, we've recovered evidence of over $50 million in stolen funds." The color drained completely from Patricia's face. She sank into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. But you can't be. You're black. You're a janitor." "I'm a federal consultant who was asked to go undercover because your criminal organization needed to be investigated from the inside," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions surging through me. "The FBI specifically chose me for this assignment because of my expertise in financial crimes and my ability to blend into environments where criminals might let their guard down." Agent Martinez continued reading Patricia her rights, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror as she realized the magnitude of her miscalculation. "This is impossible," she kept repeating. "She's just a cleaning woman. She's just a—" "Ma'am," Agent Martinez said sharply, "Dr. Johnson is one of the most respected financial investigators in the country. She has helped the FBI solve some of the most complex white-collar crimes in recent history. Her undergraduate degree is from Northwestern University, where she graduated summa cum laude. She has a master's degree in finance and a PhD in economics, also from Northwestern. She's published research on financial crimes in peer-reviewed journals and has testified before Congress on money laundering prevention. As the agents began handcuffing Patricia, I felt a profound sense of vindication washing over me. This was the moment I had been working toward for 3 months. Not just the arrest, but the complete reversal of the power dynamic that Patricia had tried to establish between us. "Before you take her away," I said to Agent Martinez, "I think Ms. Whitmore should know exactly what we found." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Patricia, in addition to documenting your financial crimes, I also documented every racist comment you made, every discriminatory action you took, and every attempt you made to restrict my movement in this building based on your racial prejudices. All of that behavior is now part of your federal file, and it will be presented to the judge as evidence of your character during sentencing." Her eyes widened in terror. "You can't. Those were private conversations." "Actually, they weren't," I replied calmly. "Every conversation you had about me, every email you sent discussing your racial assumptions, every instruction you gave to security based on your prejudices, all of that was captured as part of this investigation. Your racism isn't just morally reprehensible, Patricia. It's now evidence in a federal criminal case." The other employees on the floor had gathered to watch the arrests, their faces showing various degrees of shock and confusion. I could see them whispering among themselves, trying to process what they were witnessing. The same people who had whispered about the suspicious black janitor were now learning that she was actually a federal agent who had been investigating the real criminals in their midst. Among the crowd, I spotted the 2 junior executives who had made the comments about people like me having criminal tendencies. Their faces were ashen as they realized that their racist assumptions had been completely wrong. The person they had suspected of being a thief was actually the person catching the real thieves. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, she made one last desperate attempt to maintain her superiority. "I don't care what credentials she has," she shouted. "People like her don't belong in places like this. This whole thing is probably just some affirmative action hire who got lucky." Agent Martinez stopped and turned back to face her, her expression cold with professional disgust. "Ma'am, people like Dr. Johnson are exactly who belong in places like this. She's not an affirmative action hire. She's the most qualified person we could find for this job. She's earned every degree, every position, and every achievement through her own merit. Maybe if you'd spent less time judging people by their appearance and more time conducting honest business, you wouldn't be wearing handcuffs right now." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in that hallway, the executives, the assistants, the security guards who had searched me that night, was processing the reality of what had just happened. The woman they had dismissed, suspected, and looked down upon was actually more qualified and more accomplished than any of them. I felt a surge of emotions that I had been suppressing for months. Relief that the investigation was over. Satisfaction that justice was being served. Pride in my own professionalism and competence. But most of all, I felt a deep sense of vindication, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated because of their race. But the moment that meant the most to me came when we reached the lobby. One of the security guards from that night, the one who had seemed uncomfortable with how I was being treated, approached me hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine remorse, "I owe you an apology. I knew something wasn't right about how you were being treated that night, but I didn't speak up. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes, and realized that this was perhaps the most important moment of the entire investigation. This was someone who had witnessed racism and stayed silent, but who was now willing to acknowledge his mistake and take responsibility for his inaction. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That means more than you know. It takes courage to admit when you've done wrong, and even more courage to commit to doing better." "I will do better," he said firmly. "I promise you that. I'll never stay silent again when I see someone being treated like that." As we walked out of the building, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It wasn't just the weight of the undercover assignment or the stress of the investigation. It was the weight of a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, and judged based on the color of my skin rather than the content of my character. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. The trial of Patricia Whitmore and her co-conspirators became front-page news in Chicago. The details of the investigation, particularly the fact that an undercover federal consultant had posed as a janitor to gather evidence, captured the public's imagination. Major newspapers ran stories with headlines like "PhD Janitor Brings Down Financial Empire" and "Undercover Agent Exposes Racism and Fraud at Investment Firm." But the media attention, while gratifying, wasn't the most satisfying part of the resolution. The most meaningful moment came during Patricia's sentencing hearing, 6 months after her arrest. I had been called to testify about the investigation and about Patricia's conduct during my undercover assignment. As I took the stand, I could see Patricia sitting at the defendant's table, looking haggard and defeated. The arrogant woman who had treated me with such contempt was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the consequences of her actions. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, led me through my testimony methodically. We covered my qualifications, my assignment, and the evidence I had gathered. But then she asked me to describe Patricia's treatment of me during the investigation. "Dr. Johnson," she said, "can you tell the court about your interactions with the defendant while you were working undercover?" I took a deep breath and began to recount the details of that night in the hallway. As I spoke, I watched Patricia's face. She couldn't meet my eyes.
She stared down at the table, her shoulders hunched with shame. She repeatedly referred to me as "you people," I testified. She assumed I was there to steal something, despite having no evidence of any wrongdoing. She ordered security to search me and my belongings. She specifically stated that people like me didn't belong on the executive floor and should be restricted to areas she deemed more appropriate for someone of my background. "And what was your background, Dr. Johnson?" the prosecutor asked. "I have a PhD in economics from Northwestern University. I have 15 years of experience in financial crimes investigation. I hold a top-secret security clearance from the federal government. At the time of this investigation, I was considered one of the leading experts in money laundering detection in the Midwest." A murmur went through the courtroom. Even though the details had been reported in the press, hearing them stated in the formal setting of a federal courtroom had a different impact. The prosecutor continued, "Did the defendant's treatment of you affect your ability to conduct the investigation?" "Yes," I replied. "Her actions required me to work around additional security scrutiny and movement restrictions. But more importantly, her behavior revealed a pattern of discriminatory thinking that helped explain how she and her co-conspirators felt entitled to steal from pension funds and charitable organizations that primarily served communities of color." Judge Robert Harrison, a distinguished African-American jurist with a reputation for fairness, leaned forward. Dr. Johnson, in your expert opinion, was there a connection between the defendant's racist attitudes and her criminal behavior? I considered the question carefully. Your Honor, in my experience investigating financial crimes, I've found that people who feel entitled to discriminate against others based on race often display the same sense of entitlement when it comes to other people's money. They operate under the assumption that rules don't apply to them, and that they can take what they want from people they consider inferior. Patricia's defense attorney objected, but Judge Harrison overruled him. I'll allow it. Dr. Johnson has been qualified as an expert witness. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Harrison's words were withering. Ms. Whitmore, he said, looking directly at Patricia, you have been convicted of stealing over $50 million from pension funds that belong to teachers, firefighters, and community workers. You have also been convicted of embezzling money from charitable organizations that serve some of the most vulnerable members of our society. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the courtroom. But perhaps even more troubling than your financial crimes is the evidence of your character that emerged during this investigation. Dr. Maya Johnson is one of the most accomplished financial investigators in this country. She has served our government with distinction and has helped protect countless Americans from financial fraud. Yet you treated her with contempt and suspicion solely because of her race. Patricia's lawyer had advised her not to look up, but I could see tears streaming down her face. Your racist assumptions didn't just reveal your character, Judge Harrison continued. They blinded you to the very real threat to your criminal enterprise. If you had treated Dr. Johnson with the respect she deserved as a human being and as a professional, you might have been more careful about your criminal activities. Instead, your prejudice made you careless, arrogant, and ultimately led to your downfall. He sentenced Patricia to 15 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed under the sentencing guidelines. The judge specifically cited her treatment of me as evidence of a lack of remorse and respect for human dignity. Ms. Whitmore, he concluded, perhaps you'll have time during your incarceration to reflect on the fact that the person you tried to diminish and degrade was actually the person who brought you to justice. I hope you'll use that time to examine your assumptions about other people and emerge as a better human being. As Patricia was led away to begin her prison sentence, I felt a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, not just for the financial crimes, but for the assault on human dignity that she had perpetrated against me and countless others throughout her career. The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond Patricia's individual punishment. Meridian Financial was forced to pay substantial fines and implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs. The FBI used our investigation as a model for future undercover operations involving financial crimes. Most importantly, the case sparked conversations about racism in corporate America that led to real policy changes. Within a year of Patricia's sentencing, 3 major corporations in Chicago had hired chief diversity officers. The Illinois State Bar Association established new continuing education requirements about unconscious bias for attorneys working in corporate law. Northwestern University, my alma mater, created a new scholarship program for underrepresented students pursuing degrees in financial crimes investigation, naming it the Maya Johnson Fellowship for Economic Justice. But the most meaningful change for me personally came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter in prison mail. It was from Patricia. Dr. Johnson, the letter began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to ask for it. I'm writing to acknowledge what I did to you and to tell you that you were right about everything. The letter continued for 3 pages. Patricia described her time in prison, where she was experiencing for the first time what it felt like to be judged and mistreated because of characteristics beyond her control. She was facing discrimination from other inmates who saw her as a privileged white woman who didn't belong in their world. Now I understand, she wrote, what it feels like to be seen as less than human, to have people make assumptions about your character based on your appearance, to be treated with suspicion and contempt for no reason other than who you are. I'm ashamed that it took me 52 years and a federal prison sentence to learn this lesson. She described the programs she was participating in: diversity workshops, anger management, courses on unconscious bias. She was also tutoring other inmates who were working toward their GEDs, many of whom were young Black and Hispanic women. They are so much smarter and more capable than I ever gave people like them credit for, she wrote. I see now that my assumptions weren't just wrong, they were evidence of my own ignorance and insecurity. The letter concluded with something I never expected to read. Dr. Johnson, you are everything I should have aspired to be. You are intelligent, accomplished, dignified, and strong. You faced down my racism and still maintained your professionalism and humanity. I hope that someday I can find a way to make amends for the damage I caused, not just to you, but to everyone who suffered because of my prejudices. I read the letter 3 times before deciding how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Patricia had caused me real psychological trauma, and I wasn't obligated to participate in her rehabilitation. But another part of me recognized something important in her words: genuine remorse and a commitment to change. I wrote back, not offering forgiveness, that would have to be earned over time, but acknowledging her growth and encouraging her to continue the work of examining her biases and helping others do the same. Our correspondence continued sporadically over the following years. Patricia's letters described her transformation in prison, her work with other inmates, and her growing understanding of the systems of racism that had shaped her worldview. My letters described my new career path and the ways the case had changed my own perspective on justice and redemption. It wasn't friendship. We would never be friends. But it became something else. A dialogue between 2 people who had been changed by their encounter and were committed to using that change to make the world better. The security guard who had apologized to me, David Williams, became one of the most visible symbols of positive change emerging from the case. True to his word, he had quit his job at Meridian and enrolled in community college. He studied criminal justice and became actively involved in community organizations working to bridge racial divides. 3 years after the arrests, David graduated from the police academy and was hired by the Chicago Police Department. he specifically requested assignment to community policing units, where he could work on building trust between law enforcement and communities that had historically been over-policed and underserved. Dr. Johnson, he told me at his graduation ceremony, you changed my life that night. You showed me what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. You also showed me what happens when good people stay silent in the face of injustice. David's transformation inspired other security guards and law enforcement officers who had heard about the case. I began receiving invitations to speak at police academies, security companies, and corporate training sessions about the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. The FBI offered me a permanent position as a senior consultant, with my own team and the authority to choose my own assignments. It was a dream job, the kind of position I had worked toward my entire career. The salary was substantial, the benefits were excellent, and the prestige was significant. But I surprised myself by turning it down.
The experience at Meridian Financial had taught me something important about my own values and priorities. While I was grateful for the opportunity to serve my country through federal law enforcement, I realized that I wanted to have more control over the cases I worked on and the communities I served. Instead, I decided to start my own financial investigations firm, specializing in cases involving corporate fraud and civil rights violations. I wanted to be able to take on cases that the federal government might not prioritize, to help communities and individuals who had been victimized by people in positions of power. My decision was validated when my first case came from an unexpected source: a group of elderly residents at a nursing home whose life savings had been stolen by the facility's administrators. The lead plaintiff was an 89-year-old black woman named Rose Williams, the same name as my grandmother. When I met Mrs. Williams, she reminded me so much of Grandma Rose that I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She had the same quiet dignity, the same determination to fight for what was right, and the same belief that education and justice could triumph over ignorance and prejudice. "Child," she said, taking my hand in her weathered fingers, "I heard about what you did to that woman who treated you so poorly. You showed them that we're not who they think we are. You showed them that we're stronger than they know." As I built my practice, I made sure to hire a diverse team of investigators and analysts. I wanted to create the kind of workplace where people were judged by their skills and character, not their appearance or background. My team included former FBI agents, certified accountants, computer specialists, and paralegals, people from all racial and ethnic backgrounds who shared a commitment to justice. One of my proudest moments came when I hired a young black woman named Jasmine Martinez, who had just graduated from Northwestern with a degree in forensic accounting. She reminded me of myself at that age, brilliant, ambitious, and determined to make a difference in the world. "Dr. Johnson," she said on her first day, "I heard about the Meridian case in school. You're the reason I decided to specialize in financial crimes. I want to help expose the people who think they're above the law." Looking at Jasmine, I realized that my experience with Patricia Whitmore had led to something bigger than just solving one case or getting justice for one wrong. It had created a ripple effect that was inspiring other young people to pursue careers in fighting financial crimes and standing up for justice. The firm grew rapidly, taking on cases involving everything from pension fund fraud to charity embezzlement to mortgage scams targeting minority communities. We recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets and helped send dozens of white-collar criminals to prison. But more importantly, we were making a statement about the value of diversity in law enforcement and the importance of having investigators who understood the communities they served. 5 years after the Meridian case, my firm had become one of the most respected financial investigation companies in the Midwest. We had offices in Chicago, Detroit, and Milwaukee, and we were expanding into other markets. I had been invited to testify before Congress about financial crimes prevention, and I had been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of the most influential women in business. But the recognition that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source: a letter from the current class of forensic accounting students at Northwestern University. "Dr. Johnson," the letter read, "you have inspired all of us to pursue careers in financial crimes investigation. Your story shows us that excellence, integrity, and determination can overcome any obstacle. Thank you for proving that people like us belong in places like these." People like us. The same phrase that Patricia had used to try to diminish me was now being used by young students to claim their place in the world. The transformation was complete. Today, 5 years after that humiliating encounter in the hallway of Meridian Financial, I run one of the most successful financial investigation firms in the Midwest. My team has recovered over $200 million in stolen assets and helped send dozens of white-collar criminals to prison. We've protected pension funds, exposed charity fraud, and held powerful people accountable for their crimes. But more than the professional success, I've learned something invaluable about the nature of dignity and respect. Patricia Whitmore thought she could diminish my worth by treating me like a criminal. She thought that my race, combined with a janitor's uniform, told her everything she needed to know about who I was and what I was capable of. She was wrong on every level. Dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by other people. It's not dependent on what job you have, what you wear, or how others perceive you. Dignity comes from within, from knowing your own worth, your own capabilities, and your own commitment to doing what's right. Respect isn't something you can demand or inherit based on your position or your background. Real respect is earned through your actions, your character, and your treatment of others, especially those who society tells you are beneath you. The most dangerous kind of prejudice isn't the obvious, ugly racism that everyone can see and condemn. It's the subtle, institutional racism that allows people like Patricia to feel justified in their assumptions. It's the racism that whispers that certain people belong in certain places, that some lives matter more than others, that appearance tells you everything you need to know about character. But here's what Patricia never understood. When you judge people based on their race, their job, or their social status, you reveal everything about yourself and nothing about them. You show the world that you're narrow-minded, insecure, and fundamentally weak. You demonstrate that you're so threatened by the possibility of being wrong about people that you'd rather cling to stereotypes than open your mind to truth. The janitor she looked down on had a PhD in economics. The suspicious person she called security on was working with the FBI. The woman she thought was beneath her was actually the one who would bring her criminal empire crashing down. Every day, I think about the other Patricia Whitmores in the world. The people who make assumptions about others based on appearance. The people who think their position gives them the right to treat others with contempt. The people who believe that racism is just a personal opinion rather than a destructive force that harms everyone it touches. To those people, I want to say this: look closer. Think deeper. Question your assumptions. The person you're dismissing might be the person who exposes your crimes. The person you're underestimating might be the person who changes your world. The person you think is beneath you might be the person who teaches you what dignity really means. And to anyone who has ever been on the receiving end of that kind of treatment, anyone who has been judged, dismissed, or diminished because of their race, their job, their background, or their circumstances, I want you to know this. They don't define your worth. Their opinions don't determine your value. Their prejudice doesn't limit your potential. You are more than their assumptions. You are stronger than their stereotypes. You are capable of things they can't even imagine. My grandmother was right. Knowledge is the one thing they can't take away from you. But I would add this. Dignity is something they can't give you or take from you either. It's yours, and it always will be, no matter what uniform you're wearing or what job you're doing. They judged me by my skin and my circumstances. I showed them the strength of my soul and the power of my mind. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Be our authentic selves, stand up for what's right, and refuse to let anyone else's limitations become our own. The truth always comes out. Justice may be delayed, but it's rarely denied. And sometimes, the person you least expect to matter is the person who matters most. Patricia Whitmore learned that lesson the hard way. I hope others can learn it more easily. Remember, you never know who's watching, who's listening, or who's taking notes. Treat everyone with the dignity and respect they deserve as human beings. Not because of what they might be able to do for you or to you, but because it's simply the right thing to do. That's the lesson I learned in the hallway of Meridian Financial. That's the lesson I carry with me every day. And that's the lesson I hope will change the world, one interaction at a time. They thought they knew who I was. They had no idea who I really was. And that made all the difference.